Hello, my people. So it is the end of March, which means I'm going to be doing a February wrap up. This is the new room at the pond. Super exciting. It is the morning on a rainy Sunday, so we're just going to be chilling. I'm having my first cup of coffee, so maybe I'll be a little... I read 6 books in February, and I'm going to talk about them. The first book I read was a book that I've been wanting to read for quite a while since it came out. This is Feels While You Can. It's a sapphic horror book. You follow this main character who lives in a small town, and she's very like set on staying there. And the book starts off when her brother's ex-girlfriend comes back into town, and it's about like their dynamics and the horror that kind of like unravels from myths and legends from this small town. I enjoyed this book. Like, it was a fun ride. I think the book was really good at making like the suspense and building an atmosphere, and I think like the sex scenes are very well written. Like, it's quite steamy. But I think as like a fantasy nerd or like reader from my past, I just felt like the resolution for like who this monster was just didn't quite land, and I wish there was more of like maybe a mystery element woven throughout the story. Also, it's really fascinating, I think, to explore horror with like more marginalized perspectives, because we have a completely different like perception of the horrors of the world, and therefore like the horror fantastical as well. Like, kind of the relationship in this book, or like the dynamic between the two people in this book. They're both people of color, but they have wildly different experiences of like the small town that they grew up in, and they have very different ways of like approaching that feeling and those relationships. And it's so complex because of like different upbringings and the way that the small town relates to their families differently, and just who they are as people, like whether to stay or run. And that, I thought, was like a really good and fascinating thing to explore in this book. It just does a lot of different things, and I think from an enjoyment perspective, I probably would have enjoyed it more if it was more focused. But it was a good horror book. There is animal abuse in this that's just unnecessary, and I did not enjoy that. And like, after I finished this, after a while, the story started slipping, and I felt more and more like meh about it than I originally did. I think I gave it like 4 stars, maybe. How many stars? 3.75 stars. But I'm very glad I read it. Did I even say what this one was called? Feast While You Can by Michaela Clemens and Onjuli Datta. Co-written authors. I think that's super cool. I think you can tell, like, it's just, it's very interesting. Anyways, and then the one I was working at the pond, I just decided to pick this one up. This is the Antifa Super Soldier Cookbook. It's like a super short graphic novel. What was the author again? Matt Chomsky is the author of another comic that I read called Boys Weekend, which was really good, about this trans woman who like goes away on like a bachelor party. And yeah, that was really good. So I wanted to like check this out. I think this is possibly her earlier work. It's not like queer, but it's sort of a parody on what the right think that the left is like, and actually making the left like that, kind of. And it was a lot of fun. It's very short. I think I don't know enough about like the jokes and the insider information. I don't know enough about like Antifa to like fully appreciate this, but it's a lot of fun. And I think what Matt does really well is just like exaggerating these conspiracy theories and just going like full on out with it, which I think is a really fun experience. And I do really like the way they do their art. Next, I picked up Broughtupsy by Christina Cook. I actually listened to this as an audiobook, and the audiobook was really, really good. The narrator had like a Jamaican accent for like, yeah, when a character spoke with a Jamaican accent, and it was so incredible how the author was like switching in between all the time, and even like when voicing the thoughts and narration of our main character when they had that accent, but then altering it for now time. Anyways, highly recommend the audiobook. It's really good. This follows this woman who, the opening scene is super intense. Her brother dies just like in the first chapter, and it's so emotional, like right off the bat. And then we learned that she was like trying to get in touch with her sister, who is still in Jamaica. I believe it's taking place in like Canada, or she isn't in Canada to start off, and she really wants her sister to come to Canada and say goodbye to their brother, but they haven't seen each other in such a long time. They basically grown up in like two different lives. And so after her brother dies, she decides to go back to Jamaica and like spend time with her sister, and also talk to her like, why didn't you come? Like, our brother was dying, and little brother. They have grown up. Like, it's actually wild to consider, like, these two women are siblings, but they've grown up so completely differently. One has grown up like in their hometown in Jamaica, and our main character has like a different accent than her sister, and grew up in Canada, and they kind of reconnect in a way, or like struggle to reconnect. And our main character really wants to like scatter her brother's, like their brother's ashes all over. And so after like the opening scene, it becomes quite slow, and I think there's a lot of flashbacks to like the past and what happened and how like the relationship turned out that way. And I think like in general, the flashback sequences was not greatly written, in my opinion. It was like always like, oh, she was pulled back to the present, and it was the same like type of language every time there would be like a flashback scene in the book, which I found like a little bit redundant and nagging after a while of reading this book. And it also just like gets slower when she is in Jamaica. It was also just like fascinating to read about like how different these two siblings are because of so many reasons, and really wanting to connect with each other, but like struggling to do so, and also struggling to like see each other's side and meet each other halfway. I would have liked it more if like by the end I felt more satisfied with like the progression of their relationship, because that felt like the purpose of the book in some way, as well as our main character's relationship to like her culture in a way that she left behind parts of it. Yeah, and it also just explores like how queerness is very, very different in Jamaica, and her kind of like having to face those differences when she gets there. So our main character is like a butch lesbian, I guess, and she's broken up with her girlfriend, and there's a lot of flashbacks to her girlfriend when they were together as well. But yeah, I actually highly recommend the audiobook. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I just wish it was more satisfying by the end, I think, but I also enjoyed it a lot. Next, I picked up Dead in Long Beach, California by Vanita Blackbird. This was phenomenal. Spoiler alert, I was a big fan. So you follow this woman who, it just also opens with her brother's dead. He unalived himself, I believe, and the police come there and they just clean out his apartment, his room. She picks up his phone and starts texting people as him and acting as if he didn't die, like on his behalf, which is already kind of like a wild thing to do. But the way that this book is written is super unique. Like, there was a lot of reviews that were saying that this book is like really confusing, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna prepare to focus my mind. And it's funny because I don't think the book is confusing. You just have to like let go of solving it and just hear the book out, I guess, because it's parts of it, it's written from a we perspective sometimes, and it's never really explained who we are. And we in this book kind of takes us on a journey of seeing different lives through different time, and then we jump back to being like the main character and her choices. And when we're in her head, it's very cold. We don't get a lot of thoughts, we don't get a lot of feelings. It's just kind of what she's doing in a way. And she's a writer as well, and we get parts of like her book and her excerpts in this. And then it's quite slow, there's not a plot that happens, but all of the feelings and everything just like built up in me while reading this book. And then when we got to the end, I was just like so teary-eyed and like about to cry all of a sudden, when like the majority of the book just feels, yeah, very cold. And I loved it a lot. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was absolutely amazing. I really like books that kind of go a roundabout way of telling something or telling you about something. And sometimes when it's done really well, you feel like it's actually more direct than saying the words themselves. And I think when books manage to do that, it's just so sweet and delicious, and I'm obsessed with it. And I think this book is just like also really fun, and I had a lot of fun thinking about the things and trying to figure out what the author was doing, but also just enjoying what it was I was reading. It's obviously very sad and a very sad situation to be in, and we also get to like see her make choices about all these different like characters in her life, like with all these different characters with her life, and her niece. And she tries to like go on dates after this happens, which is also really strange. But then there's like, you know, her world that she's created, that's kind of like woven into this. And I highly recommend. I don't want to spoil too much, but I was a big fan of this. If you like weird speculative stuff, this really spoke to me, made me emotional. I also annotated it actually, because actually the dust jacket is not correct. Yeah, I was like writing my thoughts all throughout the book because I was just obsessed. This is a little book from a local author. This is Figure 8 by Alma Silva. This is a person that I met through doing like drag and a little bit in the ballroom scene, and I saw she released the book and I was so excited. So obviously I had to read it. And this specific copy is like a wrong printing, so it's written upside down, which means that you read it like a manga, which is a lot of fun. And it's just about this woman who gets merged with a god or an entity, and this sort of takes her on a journey through time and space. And parts of it is also even like set in Denmark, and the reflections that the main character has like on Denmark are also just like really good and on point. I mean, it's Alma's reflections, but this was just really phenomenal. It goes into like hardcore like sci-fi fantasy a little bit, but it's also rooted a lot in reality, and it will like jump through different points in time. And it's not always like a linear perspective. I wanted to talk to the author so much after reading this because I have so many questions, but it felt very personal. And I think being like a self-published little book, I was so impressed. But yeah, there's a lot of like morphing and like abilities kind of being explored in like your path as to what you're supposed to be doing here. Did I highlight anything? I'm sure I did. If everything is constantly unsealed, we are free to go any given direction and any chosen time. And it sort of like explores that, how like space and time is dimensions of space and time, with also like identity and like path and such. So if you live in Denmark, I recommend. It's in English, but yes. Then I read Perfect Little Angels by Vincent Anyoke. This was like the book club book that we had at the pond. It was the first one, which was a lot of fun. It was such a great discussion, so cute. This is a short story collection set in mostly Nigeria, following like, oh my god, my coffee, I'm almost forgetting. Set in Nigeria, and we follow like all these different characters who in some way are like torn as to whether they should act and do the right thing or stay silent in different situations. It focuses a lot on like family and family dynamics. There's a lot of like sisters and child-parent relationships. What's fun about this one is that the person who is in the first story and the second story is also the person in the last story, which is something like I did not pick up on until we were at the book club. So they're like connected, and there are some characters that are a little bit more like woven together, and I think I would have liked it if it was like even more like this was a complete like short story collection that were all interwoven together. Like I think that would have just made it incredible, but it was already so well written. I was like really engaged in all the stories and the dilemmas and the characters, how I got so mad when they made bad choices or felt so incredibly bad for them when they were not treated right. I just think I got very emotionally involved in this book, even if I didn't enjoy like the plot or the premise of every single story, I was, yeah, my head was so in it. And I definitely think like my least favorite story was the one with the boarding school setting, which is also a short story written from we perspective, which is kind of new to me. There's like a girl who gets her sex tape leaked. There's a lot of like closeted queers or people being subject to like toxic masculinity or cultural religious norms in Nigeria being like put upon them from family and society in general. But yeah, it was really good. I highly recommend. I had a great time with it, and it was just very engaging and a great short story collection. And then the last book that I read was another little horror. This is This World Is Not Yours by Kemi Ashwin-Giwa. So I pronounce it probably. This is super short. This along with like Feast While You Can was like 2 books that I mentioned that I wanted to read in the last like queer horror reading vlog that I did. So I'm very excited that I finally got to them, even if I wasn't able to film it this time. This just jumps right into the plot. If it was 2 women and their best friend who are all stationed on this planet that's a colonized planet from like who they work for or something like that. One of them is a scientist who is there to study the biology and the fauna and the life on the planet. And another one is like the soldier, and those 2 are a couple, and they have so many relationship struggles. And it's so frustrating to read about because they're so horrible at communicating, and we don't know the full story. And I think that's like the most frustrating part, is that we get this scene of like kind of why they're at odds with each other or bad at communicating, but it's not properly explored the way I wanted to like understand it, because it is so short. Like there's a lot in there, but I think the book did such a good job of creating like this ominous like thriller sci-fi vibe that sort of reminded me of The Luminous Dead, which is like one of my favorite, if not my favorite, like sci-fi horror book. Like I was so obsessed with it, and even though this is a lot shorter, like it gave me that same feeling of like in space or out of your element sci-fi horror creep feeling. It's basically also like a climate fiction, and the part of this book that is like climate fiction was done so well, and it's still like very obvious. It's still very obvious like what would kind of happen, but because you know what's gonna happen in a way and you anticipate it, you just are thinking about like, okay, I know this is the thing that's gonna happen, but when we get there, I don't know what the characters are gonna do or how it's actually going to turn out. But there's this like matter on this planet that are on, that their job is to regulate the balance between different organisms on the planet. So if that balance is broken, the matter that's coating the planet basically attacks the invasive species. It's just very cool. The ending was really, really good, and I enjoyed it a lot. I gave it 4.5 stars, which is, I think, if you read this, might be a too high rating in general. But I just enjoyed it so much despite its flaws, and I think sometimes like the books you enjoy the most, you can tell how flawed they are, but it doesn't matter because you were so in the story and so captivated by what it was doing, and then still managed to do that even if you have like a bunch of critiques for the book. At least that's how I feel, and that's how I feel about this book. But I highly recommend this as like a short sci-fi horror novella. It was a lot of fun, even if like the characters were driving me absolutely mad. Well, one thing I forgot, there's a weird heterosexual element in this that I just didn't vibe with, but I'm fine with that. It happened. I got over it. But it's gay. It's pretty gay. All of these books are quite queer in different ways. I'm gonna have to go to work now at the pond. Very excited. I finally got to talk a little bit about this book. I'm sorry I wasn't very articulate. I did not mention the main character's name or any of the characters' name throughout any of these books. I do not remember them because it's a month ago since I finished the last book, pretty much. But it was a really great reading month. I feel like I found some real gems. And hopefully next week, maybe I'll do my March wrap up. silly. Let me know if you read any of these, what your thoughts were on them, your favorite book of last month. Just chat with me in the comments. I hope you're having a lovely end of March, beginning of April. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.